Welcome to this week's episode of the Socialist Revolution live stream. My name is John Peterson. I'm the editor of Socialist Revolution magazine. You can visit our website at socialistrevolution.org. Each week we feature contributions and discussions on current events, history, and theory from a Marxist class struggle perspective, featuring revolutionary socialists from around the country and around the world. With over 30 million newly unemployed, with GDP and industrial production in free fall, and more deaths now due to COVID-19 than the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars combined, let's not forget that the 2020 presidential election is still on. For a few weeks there, it seemed as though Bernie and his supporters might actually pull this off, with momentum building after New Hampshire and Nevada, and the anyone but Bernie camp in a complete mess. His road to the nomination, and quite possibly to the White House, seemed all but assured. Millions of people believed that the nightmare of the Trump presidency would soon be over, that universal health care, an end to student debt, and a higher minimum wage nationally were just around the corner. Then came South Carolina. In a carefully orchestrated and calculated maneuver, the Democratic Party tops closed ranks around this year's Hillary Clinton, the preferred choice of the establishment, Joe Biden. Sanders' campaign quickly unraveled. The COVID-19 pandemic and the economic meltdown swept the country like a tsunami, and everyone's immediate attention was turned away from politics. But then, on April 8th, after a long and electrifying campaign, Bernie Sanders conceded defeat to the Democratic Party machine and suspended his campaign to become that party's presidential nominee. A few days later, he rubbed salt in the wound by wholeheartedly endorsing Joe Biden as the nominee. A collective gasp could quite literally be heard as millions of Bernie supporters realized that they would, once again, be forced to vote for the alleged lesser evil, or cast a protest vote for a smaller party candidate that was doomed to lose, or just sit out the election altogether because they couldn't stomach the options available. The long and the short of this experience is quite clear. The so-called strategy for reforming the Democratic Party, of trying to force it to the left, of transforming it from a capitalist party to a workers' party, fell flat on its face once again. Now, those of us who support the ideas of socialist revolution recognized the significance of Bernie's campaign. We understood the importance of the energy that he brought to millions of people, the awakening politically that he created in this country, the role he played in putting the debate around socialism front and center in American politics. But we argued all the time, consistently from the beginning, that the Democratic Party, which by the way is neither democratic nor is it a party in any real sense of the word, that party cannot be reformed, it cannot be meaningfully pushed to the left, it cannot be made to serve two masters with irreconcilably opposed class interests, that is, the capitalists and the workers. Now, all those groups on the left who put all their eggs into the support Sanders as a Democrat basket have been left without a clear path forward, and many of their supporters are demoralized and disoriented. Now, many of these groups and individuals have declared that under no circumstances will they support Joe Biden. But the pressure to support the lesser evil will build as we get closer to November. And perhaps most importantly, these folks helped foment illusions that real change is possible through the Democrats, and this resulted in a tremendous expenditure of energy. Now, others are going to continue trying to collar left-moving workers and youth right back into the Democrats. They're going to try to pull off another bait and switch, which is the classic move of that party. And all of these words might sound pretty harsh. This is a pretty harsh analysis, but it is the truth. And we can't draw a proper balance sheet and learn the lessons of this experience if we don't start by analyzing the facts as they actually stand. Now, millions of Bernie supporters obviously had honest illusions in his campaign. Their class instincts drew them to reject people like Clinton and Biden and to support a candidate who called for a political revolution against the billionaire class. But for some groups and individuals on the left, supporting candidates on the Democratic Party ballot line is a worked out strategy. It's something that they allege is something new, and most importantly, they say that this is something pragmatic and realistic. Now, we recently ran an article on socialistrevolution.org with the title, Bernie Sanders and the Lessons of the Dirty Break, Why Socialists Shouldn't Run as Democrats. And this article got quite a lot of buzz, especially among readers of Jacobin. In it, Kay Khan examines the arguments for what some put forward as a dirty break. And people like Seth Ackerman, who is the executive editor of Jacobin magazine, puts forward this idea. And as you know, Jacobin is probably most clearly the most popular left-leaning magazine in the country today. So today we're going to have a conversation about that article and about these ideas with the author, Kay Khan. This comrade is an organizer and member of the IMT in the Bay Area in California and a regular contributor to Socialist Revolution. Our aim in this discussion is to give our viewers an opportunity to compare and contrast a revolutionary, class-independent Marxist approach to electoral politics with a reformist, class collaborationist approach. So, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us all the way from the West Coast. Could you start by giving us a bit of background and explain the main lines of what has come to be known as the Ackerman thesis?
Sure. So the background to the Ackerman thesis is the transformation of the DSA that occurred after Bernie Sanders' last run for the presidency. That opened up a lot of sort of unrealized potential within the left, which was channeled at that point because of the words democratic socialism into the DSA. And the old guard, which had for years in the DSA taken up a position openly of realigning the party, trying to reclaim the Democratic Party, was in complete crisis. They were swept aside. The Ackerman position is claiming not to be a realignment position, although I was more generous towards that, saying, okay, they're saying it's not realignment, but if you look at it now, at least a layer of the Jacobin crowd, and I'm speaking particularly of the publisher, seems to have clearly moved in that direction. But the Ackerman thesis, to summarize it, the idea is basically that it is too difficult, impossible to actually set up a actual political party in the United States, and that we can be agnostic, socialists can be agnostic about the ballot line and choose to run as Democrats, choose to run as Republicans, or choose to run as independents, that the ballot line doesn't actually mean anything at all. And the rest of it really involves setting up a non-profit organization, which would be the actual party itself with, they claim, a program.
Okay, thanks. So basically, these folks are saying that the electoral laws are so overwhelmingly stacked against the working class that we will never be able to overcome these obstacles. What would you say to people that say it's impossible to build a viable third party? And are they really saying that it doesn't matter what ballot line you run on?
I mean, that is literally the claim. The argument, more or less, is that the Democratic Party or any party in the U.S. is not a party. And so far, up until that point, that's actually correct. These are not parties. But from that correct premise, they draw an incorrect conclusion that that socialists can run as any party, literally saying that they can run as any party as long as they can put forward a program without having a party. So that definitely is the case. And in terms of what I'd say to those that say it's impossible to build a viable third party, if you look at how that's phrased, yes, and a third party is by definition not viable. But if you look at the history of this country, we've had different two-party systems. And it's not always been the Democrats and Republicans. Different class forces struggling can cause a new party to emerge. The Republican Party is a great example with the Second American Revolution, how they, from a very short amount of time from their formation, came into power. So it's definitely possible to build a party. It's not easy, and that really is what they're tapping into, the fact that it's not easy to build a party. And that largely has to do with the fact that in this country, we don't really have political parties. So it's not really a question of building a first, a second, a third party. It's a question of building an actual political party that is based on membership of the working class and is a working class party.
I think that's great that you raised the example of the Republican Party. Obviously, a lot of people forget that the party of Donald Trump, the Republicans, was originally the party of Abraham Lincoln, and it ended up within 6 years of its formation coming to power and ultimately waging a revolutionary war to smash slavery in this country. A massive transformation that a lot of people said, back then they said, oh, the power of the slaveocracy is insurmountable. There's no way we can ever challenge that. This will always be a slave country. Just as Trump says, the U.S. will never be a socialist country. This will always be a capitalist country, as Nancy Pelosi has said. The Democratic Party is a capitalist party. I think the root of this, it seems to me, is that there's a lack of confidence in the working class, which is, of course, the largest class in society. It's the decisive class in modern society. It's the only progressive class in society that can take humanity forward. And if these people are saying that the electoral system can't even be changed, if even just the electoral structures can't be challenged, I imagine that in effect they believe that fundamental social change that goes beyond that, i.e. a socialist revolution, is impossible. I mean, they must believe that capitalism is unbeatable, that it will dominate us forever, or at least up until its inability to handle the climate crisis drives us to extinction. Is that a fair assessment of their views?
That is a very fair assessment, I'd say, and I think it has ultimately, the root of that assessment is in their method. Explicitly, the Jacobin publication is, their main theorist, Vivek Chibber, is an anti-dialectics analytical Marxist that it rejects the method of Marx himself. And of course, we're not going to go into full sort of detailed explanation of that, but the lack of looking at how contradictions can cause sudden dramatic changes, sudden ruptures, is completely a part of their political program, a part of their perspectives, going so far that even today, when you have all of society pretty much in crisis across the world, their program is still sticking to things like the Green New Deal. By their program, of course, to be fair, there's Jacobin, the publication, and then there's a tendency, or actually, frankly, multiple tendencies around Jacobin in the DSA. And what they share in common is that same program, and it's continuing to be the Green New Deal, sort of this left-wing, sort of left progressive sort of politics. And not taking into account, for instance, that even Medicare for All can't really solve this crisis because you are leaving the biotech, medical device, healthcare systems just in public hands. Still, you just have a sort of more single payer system. Their approach has been a approach of trying to decommodify one segment after another, as if that can be done piecemeal, as if you can untangle capitalism piecemeal, and you can make the capitalists give up 1/5 of the economy when you nationalize healthcare without a sharper struggle that raises the question of private property overall. So absolutely, I think that's fair, and those two things definitely are linked. They not only do they view the electoral system as unchangeable, they view it as the only way forward, only way possible is that they have to put all of their energy, all of their perspectives into electoral struggle. But to be fair, that is linked with some perspectives on their part of linking with class struggle, with strike waves as they emerge, but never quite drawing the conclusion that a wave of class struggle could be the basis of an entirely new political party that could challenge private property itself.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, without dialectics, there is no Marxism. And when you take a mechanical, pragmatic, empirical approach, you end up mistaking the past for the perspectives for the future, i.e., you think that the next 10 years are going to be like the last 10 years. Well, we've seen in the last couple of months that everything can transform and can turn into its opposite very, very quickly. And without that deep Marxist analysis, without historical and dialectical materialism, you end up with that kind of a mess, frankly, a political mess, because mistakes in theory do lead to mistakes in practice. So you said that they put all their energy into change through the ballot box. Obviously, they do support strikes, and they do talk a lot about the importance of the working class as a class. But I think, as you say, the bottom line is that they don't see any of this struggle ultimately transcending capitalism. They want to try to reform capitalism within its limits, not overthrow it altogether, right?
I mean, from their perspective, they would. I'm basing this off my interaction with people that you could broadly say are part of the Jacobin current within the DSA. At least subjectively, they want to get rid of capitalism. I think their sort of disagreement with us is their perspective that it can be done piecemeal. They've put forward all sorts of ideas ranging from, and these are ideas that have been discredited, frankly, by history. Ideas of like Andre Gorz and Miliband talking about non-reformist reforms and revolutionary reformism or revolutionary reform, something like that, where they're providing, they have sort of provided this for a period. It's a justification for reformism itself, while acknowledging the fact that the current mood among socialists, this huge layer of socialists that's emerged since 2016, I'm saying huge relative to before, of course, is not exactly for reformism. So they have to make that concession. But I think subjectively, they want to get rid of capitalism. It's just that their program, their method, isn't quite up to that task.
And of course, your program, your method is what guides your action. It guides your plans for preparing for the future, for preparing for these events. So if you don't have that in the cards today, you're not going to have it at hand when you need it in the future. And I think obviously the big irony is that nowadays we're in an epoch of counter reforms, of austerity, of cuts, of massive unemployment we're talking about right now. We're talking about, after COVID-19, whenever that may be, we're going to have massive deficit crisis, all this printing of money, basically the bailouts and everything. All that's eventually, that bill is going to come due, and the working class is going to be asked to pay for it. So it's very ironic that at a time when only counter reforms are possible, reformism is gaining a lot of support. Obviously, people don't usually wake up from one day to the next and decide, well, I want to overthrow capitalism, I want a complete socialist revolution and transformation of the world. But, the thinkers of the movement, those who are laying out the strategies, really, it is incumbent upon those who are providing ideas for large numbers of people to have, you would think, a much bolder, more audacious program and perspective. And ultimately, although they might want to get rid of capitalism, if your plan doesn't actually include going beyond the limits of capitalism, if you don't even think you can transcend the electoral laws of capitalism, how are you going to get past capitalism itself? Unless they have a perspective of achieving this, 200-300 years from now, after the climate crisis has basically destroyed what remains of human civilization.
I mean, that is their perspective. It's and this isn't just them, but just more broadly speaking, reformists that we can come across. And I think readers of Socialist Revolution, listeners right now, they're interested in revolutionary socialism, and they're going to be familiar with a large milieu of people that talk about socialism as being something on the horizon. The problem with politics of the horizon is that you can keep moving towards the horizon. It's just going to keep moving. The real challenge here is the fact that the rise of reformism in the U.S. is probably to do with the fact, or reformist politics within the socialist left in the U.S. is probably to do with its inexperience to some degree, but to some degree it has to do with the fact that reformists have managed to be more organized than Forces of Revolution, or have a larger organization than Forces of Revolution, I should say, in terms of their publication, and it's getting a wide appeal. So I think this squarely sort of goes to Jacobin and publications like Jacobin that put forward a reformist line and educate people in that sense. So if you see new members coming in to the DSA across the country, and Jacobin isn't everywhere, it's not some monolith either, but wherever they are present, they've done a good job of being organized within their DSA locals, and then they will absorb people coming in with revolutionary ideas into the ideas, frankly, again, discredited ideas of Karl Kautsky. And we're not talking about the Karl Kautsky of Lenin's inspiration. We're talking about the sort of renegade Karl Kautsky that they actually uphold, and they educate this layer of people in those ideas that somehow they're still fighting for socialism while ultimately just ceding to reformism, and that again is it puts the entire conversation in a position where if you actually put forward socialist politics, and by that I mean politics which have the perspective not only of the overthrow of capitalism, But the next phase after that being a classless, stateless society, that the sort of politics itself, that is viewed as ultra left. So socialism itself is ultra left in as far as the perspective of most of these people are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that reformism is a natural and normal part of the process of rising consciousness, especially in a country like the United States. I mean, let's not forget the significance of this, the fact that millions of people, a majority of young people, call themselves socialists. Poll after poll shows this. Millions of young people call themselves communist. Even they've moved beyond socialism or any form of reformism, and they are open to a complete revolutionary perspective. And of course, the role of the labor leaders in this country is important, and we can't forget that. The conservative role, the role of class collaboration, of collaborating with the bosses, of believing that what's good for the bosses is good for the workers, and of basically holding back any general upsurge in class struggle, and of course, of not allowing or doing what they can to prevent the rise of a political expression of the working class and trying to, again, channel all that discontent into the Democratic Party. Of course, in 2016, we saw that the labor leaders failed to channel all of that into the Democrats as they typically did, and a lot of that support actually went to Trump as a sort of, screw you to the establishment, to the Clintons, to the Democrats after years of failures and betrayals, after the disappointment of 8 years of Obama, etc. So I think this is natural and normal, and we shouldn't, overemphasize the negative, symptomatic points here. Obviously, this is wonderful for us. It gives us an audience to find people who do want to learn more about the differences between revolutionary and reformist socialism. But I think the key part of the ingredient that's missing here is that while consciousness can tend to be a bit conservative, it catches up with a bang on the basis of events, on the basis of experience. And this is precisely the piece of the puzzle that these folks seem to leave out. And that's a crucial piece of the puzzle. That's what gives us the confidence that a relatively small group of highly trained, highly educated, highly motivated individuals, organized so that the whole is greater than the sum of any of our individual parts, can, under certain circumstances in history, play a transformative role, a catalyzing role that can then turn that small force into a force of millions of people, a real force for real change in this world. But just want to get back to one thing you mentioned. You mentioned this sort of revival of the ideas of Karl Kautsky, this sort of Neo-Kautskyism. And as you said, it's not the sort of earlier Kautsky who was looked to even by people like Lenin as a great Marxist. Although, of course, I think if you go back and read Kautsky, you're going to see that he has a very rigid approach, a very mechanical and undialectical approach. And it's not an accident that he eventually consciously rejected dialectics, again, leading into that philosophical and practical dead end. But could you tell us a little bit more about this Neo-Kautskyism and how it is that they think that, examples like the German Revolution or the Finnish Revolution, which were unmitigated disasters for the working class, are somehow models for, a so-called parliamentary road to socialism?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that. They look at Chile as a model of parliamentary road to socialism, right? So it gets to the point of not drawing even obvious conclusions, but their Kautskyism, is a Neo-Kautskyism. It's not even as simple as I said. It's not that it's the Kautsky that sort of inspired Lenin, but rather what they're putting forward is they're using Kautsky's theories to actually appropriate Lenin and Trotsky. If you see a lot of, and by this point, by the way, I do want to make something clear as far as I can understand. This is not necessarily Jacobin, the publication, but the political tendencies that have emerged around Jacobin that have some link to Jacobin, but not a direct link in the DSA. So those are the Neo-Kautskyists, to be precise. They put forward the idea that Lenin and Trotsky were Kautskyists, and Jacobin has published views like this, which has a germ of truth in the sense that Kautsky inspired them, but they use Kautsky's road to socialism argument, or what Vivek Chibber wrote, our road to socialism, that article. To really neutralize revolutionary currents and frankly discredit names like Lenin and especially Trotsky. Within the context of the DSA, a really strange term, soft trot, is used And people focus on the trot part. I don't know. I don't even know what it means to be a soft trot. But the soft part is what is really important to have a look at here. They have completely taken out the question of class struggle and the victory of the working class over the capitalists and on the question of private property from Marxism. And that essentially, I think, is Neo-Kautskyism in sort of a nutshell, is a sort of post hominist appropriation of actual revolutionaries, not Kautsky but others, through the works of Kautsky and changing it. And from what I've understood, it's also a rather disingenuous reading of Kautsky, where they're ignoring his writings from a certain period to make it seem like he was actually more revolutionary than he was in that period.
Well, I'm not going to comment on the question of the soft trots. I think we leave that to one side for today. But basically what he's saying is that these people, they want to blunt the revolutionary edge of Lenin and Trotsky by kind of lumping them in together with Kautsky. And that reminds me a little bit of what I understand to be their rejection of the class nature of the state. I mean, Bhaskar Sunkara, in a debate I had with him a few months back, basically has an evolutionary view of the state, this sort of abstract understanding of democracy, as if social progress wasn't the result of class struggle, but just through sort of gradual reforms and changes. And yeah, a little nudge here and there through a strike or something like that, but ultimately an evolutionary versus a revolutionary perspective on societal change. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you phrased it absolutely correctly. And the most interesting part there is this it's a simultaneous view of the state as being too powerful to take on, impossible to make inroads against this. When we're talking about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, I think they correctly understand that these aren't really parties, that these are semi-state institutions. But they say that the state is too powerful for us to take those questions on. But at the same time, they think the state is weak enough that the socialists can come to state power through the means of the Democrat Party itself. So they definitely have a sort of class-neutral view of the state, where they do view it as a tool that can be taken and appropriated by any class. I think that actually, if you take that a step further, and returning now to the publication, less the tendencies around them, Sankara even went so far as to say recently, and he said things like this repeatedly, that the Democratic Party is preferable for socialists to the Republican Party because it has a progressive wing. And he's said in the past that he views his work as being bringing the progressives to the left. So I don't know how far that's going to be effective. I think they're a bigger political force, and they've pulled the entire project much more to the right. But I think that question of party and state really does link together with the fact that they view both as neutral instruments that they can take over, or at least use.
Well, I think it's interesting that, this idea of trying to push the Democrats to the left, what's actually happened is they're working to push the left into the Democrats. And now, although they're not supporting Joe Biden, Sunkara and Jacobin are not supporting Joe Biden, they nonetheless continue to argue that, a third party is impossible. It can never, become a first party, which is, of course, what we believe. We believe that the majority class in society, if it had its own political party, could easily be the majority party. But they continue to support voting for Democrats down the ballot line coming up in November and all the other races. So again, still doubling down basically on this question of using the Democratic Party line without really, as you say, with a very contradictory position, frankly, on, the state is insurmountable, the electoral laws are insurmountable, and yet somehow that insurmountable state and that insurmountable electoral setup is going to allow us to use it and take it over and just do whatever we want with it once we're in power. I mean, I think it'd be worth commenting, if you could, a little bit about what it would have looked like if Sanders had actually won this thing on the basis of the Democratic Party. If he'd come to the presidency in the midst of this crisis with a party, his own party, quote unquote, the Democrats, largely against them, at least those in power, the Republicans completely against them, the Supreme Court completely against them, the whole apparatus of state, the military against them. What did these people expect him to do to actually pass some of these measures, which of course, we support a lot of the basic reforms that he put forward. But what would really, even those basic minor reforms, like universal health care, albeit Medicaid for all and not a national health service, things like that. How would he have passed something like that if he actually had come to power?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. One thing to add to your sort of question there, the analysis you put forward in the question, is also the role of the media. In this country, like most countries that have a formal democracy, the media isn't completely controlled by the state, nor directly controlled by parties, generally speaking. But that being said, there are definitely wings of the media in this country that are the ideological arms of either the Republican or the Democratic Party. So that would be against him as well. So that's the full context of everything that he would be up against, and maybe a handful of supporters here or there. And because it's not through the means of a real party running on the Democrat ballot, you'd get a lot of unevenness in how truly with Sanders these supporters were anyway when push comes to shove. And the parliamentary discipline that we've seen the Democratic Party put on people like AOC, for instance, who has moved more towards the right, has fired a lot of her left-wing staff. But that would play a factor as well. But isolated within the Oval Office, they expect Biden. I'm saying Biden. They expect Bernie to have rule by fiat, by essentially passing one ordinance after another, one decree after another. And I'm not quite sure what's democratic about running things like that, even from a bourgeois perspective. But they had their entire sort of argument hinged upon that. Of course, there's limits to what you can actually do with disorders as a president. Ultimately, the question, and this is, I think, the biggest point that socialists need to be thinking about right now. The question is about private property. You cannot overturn capitalist property relations. The rule of private property in things like, how much remdesivir is going to cost if it's going to actually be a cure, how much a vaccine is going to cost, how it's going to be distributed. You can't change that with even the Defense Production Act. The Defense Production Act can require you to produce something, but there's limits, and even if the state comes and takes it over, there's compensation given. So again, there's limits within that capitalist system of what can be done, and they're never really looking to that question. And I mean broadly, reformists here in general aren't looking to that question of how to challenge private property, and that actually never comes up as a factor in the analysis of Seth Ackerman. What is this party going to do that's embedded as a nonprofit within the Democratic Party? What is it going to do to raise the question of private property? And the answer you'll get to that very, very often is that it's going to build the socialist movement. And that would be ultimately what they think Bernie's victory would have done anyway, is build a socialist movement, even if he's isolated. But again, that's sort of, these are politics of the horizon. So they despite the sort of severe crisis, and this is just the start of it, despite the severe crisis today, their perspectives remain unchanged, which is that a party for workers, that the transformation of society to move away from the being organized around private property to being based on a socialized planned economy. All of that is not something they think is achievable in our lifetimes. And we do, of course. We think socialism in our lifetimes is achievable.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, that had Sanders come to power, I mean, he could obviously pass all kinds of executive orders, but there's only so much you can do with that. Ultimately, in the current political setup, Congress controls the purse strings and where you can get the money to pay for these things. Now, we explain, of course, it's been produced by the working class over the last couple centuries, over the last few decades in particular, to pay for all of these things, to reduce the work week, to allow for genuine free healthcare for all, education, quality housing, to rebuild the infrastructure, et cetera, quality food, quality air, quality. I mean, everything we can do, we've got it. Everything in our program is actually materially possible based on what the working class has created. But if you don't infringe upon the limits of private property, if you don't move to nationalize the Fortune 500, if you don't expropriate the literally trillions of dollars that these companies and these billionaires are sitting on unused just in bank accounts in the US and offshore, then you're going to be nowhere. And that's, of course, where Bernie Sanders would have drawn the line. He would have been trapped, isolated in the Oval Office, as you said, without doing that. The only way forward to mobilize the working class, to call for a general strike, and ultimately to fight for a complete social transformation. So why put all of your perspectives into getting into power as a Democrat when you're going to have to build, if you're going to actually do anything with that power, you're going to have to build a mass movement, a working class movement in the workplaces, in the neighborhoods, everywhere else. Anyway, why not start building that kind of a party now? And so that brings us to this question. I mean, we're it's all well and good. I think it's clear. We're against the Democratic Party. I think millions of young people and workers agree with us there, but that's largely a negative position. People want something to be for. What are we fighting for, and what form do you think a new workers' party, which we call for, could actually take?
So that's a great question. I want to actually add one thing to what you said before answering your question, though, is the question of nationalization. They do support nationalization, but they support nationalization, a la the UK or the social democracies of Europe. That means they don't support nationalization under workers' control, which is what distinguishes a revolutionary socialist form of nationalization from a reformist form of nationalization, which is just the state takes over. We're not for the capitalist state taking over huge segments of the economy. That quite often is a way to float the capitalist economy so that so that private property can continue, so that profits can continue. So we want it under workers' control. In terms of the
before you answer my question, just wanted to jump in real quick again. Just say that exactly. I mean, they might be in favor of nationalizing or bringing under public ownership with compensation this or that sector of the economy. Basically to subsidize the work of the capitalists, the public school system, the postal service in some form, the highways, all that kind of stuff, which were basically paid for by the public in order to facilitate the movement of goods and commodities and workers and so on. But they're not in favor of a rational economy as a whole, of a planned economy as a whole, nationalizing, say, the Fortune 500 to start under workers' control, as you said, and then integrating that into a rational plan that could, again, dramatically reduce the working week and provide more than enough for everybody, not just in this country, but to begin the socialist transformation of the world, because, of course, this has to be a worldwide system.
And they don't have that perspective either, by the way, of the fact that socialism needs to be a worldwide system. And I say they don't have that perspective because it's not been stated. It's not a part of their politics. You'll see a lot of the left, their internationalism is limited to, well, we'll support, for instance, the Palestinian cause. We'll show up to a rally, and that's our internationalism. Or for certain segments of the left, we'll support Iran against U.S. imperialism, or we'll support China against U.S. imperialism. That's internationalism. But yeah, most of the left, even the huge segments of the left that think of themselves as revolutionaries, not to speak of the reformists, they don't have this type of internationalism in mind. Your question about what form of party would take is actually very important. Well, the first thing about it is it's who that party should include. So a lot of groups, that will call themselves a party, and several that don't call themselves a party, have a view that that a workers' party means that workers join their party of, let's say, 200, 300, 400 people in this country. And that is completely missing a sense of proportion when you're not even 1 in a million, in a country, expecting millions of workers to join. You directly is not the sort of party that we put forward. So clearly that means the party itself the question isn't really, do you have, you can join the party if you agree with everything and have the right program, but it's a question of organizing the workers into a party, and that would include people with ideas like this, of course, being a part of that. And to their credit, and I'm speaking here of the tendencies and currents around Jacobin in the DSA, to their credit, I think they're actually relatively clear on this question. In the DSA, for instance, they're not putting forward the idea, hey, let's transform the DSA into a party. There is a latent sort of desire to build a party, and it's even in the platform for several people running for DSA linked with the Jacobin caucuses. They do want that party, so they don't make that sort of incorrect assessment. We're also in agreement with them that a party, when it's built, for them it's going to be forever, but for us, like more urgently, that party needs to be based on, ultimately it needs to be based on the trade unions. Whether it's a question of like in the UK, where the Labour Party emerged out of the union movement, or like Germany, where it was the other way around, where the unions were built up by a mass socialist party, whichever form it takes. And it's possible that in this country it could take that second form, because there is the DSA today, which is a reference point for socialism, because the term socialism has a certain traction. It could take that form, but ultimately it would need to rest upon the unions. And this is just in case listeners are wondering why I'm stressing that. If we look at the sort of recent period, we've had the collapse of many traditional workers' parties across the world, and new parties have emerged. In most of those cases, or at least in several of those cases, these parties have not been built on or based on or linked to the trade union movement. As conservative as that bureaucratic layer can be, and we're seeing in the DSA, frankly, that even in some cases the labor bureaucrats are very critical of these reformist currents that we're criticizing right now. They think these currents are going too far. But without including or basing a party on organized labor, we've seen these new parties that have emerged very quickly collapse, lose steam, lose direction, and simply not have the same sort of impact as they had the potential to have, because they had such support from workers overall. To sort of summarize an answer to your question, what sort of form could it take? Ultimately, it would need to be built on a workers' sort of organized power, which in this country is only the unions. And of course, we understand that unions can be conservative around that. And finally, to link it to the rest of our conversation, that party would need to have a program of revolutionary socialism that, again, raises that question of private property, talks about getting a workers' government, not so that we can run a government, but a workers' government to raise the question of private property, which is ultimately the root of the crisis today. It's the root of the challenges the working class faces, that a small layer appropriates everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is hard to predict exactly what form that party is going to take, but it's clearly going to have to be a convergence of different social working class struggles and of union struggles ultimately. I mean, the 13 million or so workers that are organized in the AFL-CIO right now is a relatively small percentage of the total population. But if you look at the sectors that are unionized, if those 13 million workers went on strike, the complete shutdown of the country. I mean, we've seen what COVID-19 has done in terms of shutting down the economy. And the reason it's shut down, it's not the virus, it's because the workers are not going to work. They're not actually moving things like they normally do because of the threat of the virus. And obviously we support measures that are taken to protect the health of workers. And obviously we think that frontline workers in particular should be given extra protections and extra wages, and that there should be a lot more of them so that the burden just doesn't fall on a small handful of people. But bottom line is we need the labor movement. And I think we're going to see in the next period, as we've seen already with some of the wildcat strikes taking place around the COVID-19 virus, in Amazon and Instacart and elsewhere, you're going to see new layers of the class coming on board that can infuse the labor movement, the organized labor movement, with all the power that it has, with new energy, with new vitality, with new leaders. And ultimately, the current labor leaders are going to either have to move genuinely to the left, or they're going to have to be pushed aside altogether. And I think we're going to see that process accelerated in the next period. But one question I have then is, so is it, you mentioned all these little groups that think that they're launching the, mass party of the working class. Is it the task of revolutionaries to try to force these events, to actually build a genuinely mass working class socialist party? Because I think if we look at history, it shows that truly mass parties only emerge from mass events, from mass movements, from mass organizations, including the unions, as we've said. But the question then becomes, what do we do with those mass forces that are moving in a left or even revolutionary direction? How do you help channel all that energy into the actual transformation of society?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question that had a lot of nuance even in it. And I want to continue with that nuance. So, is it the task of revolutionaries to build a mass socialist party? If you're an individual revolutionary that's organized in a revolutionary organization, and you're a member of a union, you should definitely, talk about the fact that the unions should stop giving their money to the Democrats, and it should be channeled towards a new party. If you're a non-unionized worker, you can play a role. You can play the role of building up a future leadership for a mass party. But the point here is the stress here is mass party, and mass doesn't mean 1 or 10 people. It doesn't mean 100 or 1,000 people. In this country, we're well over 300 million people. A mass of people here is hundreds of millions of people. And we know we're not suggesting that this is going to be spontaneous, that this is going to emerge out of nowhere. Of course, it's going to be built on class struggle, and ideas play a very important role in that class struggle. But I think revolutionary socialists need to keep a sense of proportion about what they can actually achieve in this current period with the numbers that we have on the revolutionary socialist side. So our task then is of course to build up that leadership and participate and bring our ideas to the struggles as they're emerging and be a part of those struggles if we're positioned to be in those struggles, not of course shout at them from the outside. So I hope that answers your question, but it's of course I just wanted to make sure that anyone listening understood. No one's suggesting that revolutionaries should sit aside, but just again, the stress here is have a sense of proportion, and we need to be careful about understanding what role we are to play, not in what can be achieved, because the mass socialist party can be achieved. It's just we need to be clear about our role and the role that we need to play as a working class as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think you're saying that, history is going to do 99% of the heavy lifting for us, so to speak. The crisis of the system itself, its inability to provide a quality of life, a good quality of life for people, not just around the world, which obviously has always been the case, but even here in the United States, there's millions and millions of people in poverty, millions of children that go to bed hungry, hundreds of thousands of homeless people. It's those kinds of things accumulated over time that are going to, flip the switch, so to speak, and force millions of people then to move in that direction. And so, if history does 99% of the work, we're talking about that 1%, so to speak, preparation to get the full convergence of factors together, both objective and subjective, that can allow for a successful socialist revolution. I did have a quick question, though. You touched on this earlier, but what role do you think DSA can and should play in putting forward this perspective? And also, what role should Jacobin or could Jacobin be playing, given its relative prominence on the U.S. left?
Sure, and those are both great questions. So DSA is actually uniquely positioned of all socialist groups in the country, and that's largely because it's very different than most socialist groups. It's more of a phenomenon that's emerged of workers sort of moving into an organization because it's gained some critical mass, and that mass critical mass portion is sort of important there. The role the DSA should play is not to say, hey, we are the party, come join us, because even with, I think the DSA is claiming 70,000 people now, active and inactive combined. So those aren't small numbers for the American left within the American left history. That being said, that's still not enough people to be the basis of a party. So we can't have the DSA shouldn't become a sect where they just say we are the party, you should join us. The role the DSA can and should play is that it has links to labor unions, it has links to rank and file workers, it has several sort of even labor leaders involved in it. It has certain influence and clout in society, and the DSA can and should launch a campaign to form a mass socialist party independent of the Democrats, and that is absolutely vital. And that's sort of linking to the conversation we're having just before this about the sense of proportion that's needed, the proportions are a bit different with the DSA. They can play that role. And should. The DSA is absolutely positioned to do so. As far as Jacobin is concerned, there's only so much we can suggest because of the sort of editorial line of the paper itself about what it should do. But let's say that we had influence on that editorial line. I would suggest they do the same thing. They obviously we're not going to ever come to agreement on questions like Karl Kautsky or the idea that there is a parliamentary road to socialism. That being said, I think Jacobin should be, if they're actually going to follow through on the Ackerman thesis, the Ackerman blueprint. I was much more charitable about this when it came out. It seems to actually want the establishment of a party and have a dirty break. And so it should actually put forward the idea now that people should leave the Democratic Party, that they should prepare to form a new party. But it's not doing that, which is why I'm less charitable about this entire idea now, because it's been 2 election cycles and it's still exactly where it was. In fact, even worse, they're not quite channeling people to vote for Biden, but like you said earlier. Definitely down ballot. They're still trying to get people to stay in line with working within the Democratic Party system or use that ballot line. The other point about what the role Jacobin could play also links back to the DSA itself. Again, I want to be clear. A lot of times, a lot of people will speak of Jacobin as being directly linked with the caucuses, like Bread and Roses within the DSA that are linked with it quite often, but they have some influence. That part also is very important. In that same role, within the DSA, Jacobin should be leading that question. If they genuinely believe that an eventual break from the Democrats is desirable, that should be front and center right now, and it should be on a line of class intransigence, not confusion around whether Democrats should be supported. So the short answer is they need to. It's the managing editor of Jacobin that wrote this article. I think it's time they reevaluate it and move on from it.
Yeah, I think really after Bernie's second capitulation, what better time is there to make that break? I mean, if their perspective was always, well, this is just a temporary tactic, even if we disagreed with it, it would seem that doubling down now is one of the worst possible things they can do. So I think that's a really good point about the way that DSA and Jacobin could use the platform that they have and the relative size that they have to put forward the idea for a new class-independent, mass working class socialist party in this country. I think that would resonate a lot, especially a couple weeks ago, I guess a month ago now, when Bernie, conceded this second time. I think it could have had a big impact. But again, as we said, it's natural that people would pass through a sort of reformist phase, and it's natural that a publication like Jacobin, which bases itself on a sort of neo-reformism, reformism without reforms, while trying to couch it in a little bit more revolutionary language from time to time and class language, would be the largest publication. But in the next period, I think we're going to see a lot more people looking for far more radical ideas, because there is a real sense of urgency in preparing for these events. Whatever form that new party takes, whatever form the class struggle takes as far as strike waves and the rise of new unions and new leaders and the regeneration of the current unions, whatever form that all takes, when all this class struggle starts to converge, if it's going to succeed in using all that energy to actually change society, we need a revolutionary strategy. We need a revolutionary program that transcends the capitalist system, that breaks with the private property of the means of production, that moves again to nationalize the Fortune 500 under workers' control, and to bring those ideas in an effective way in large enough numbers into that party, into those unions, into those struggles, into the broader layers of the working class. Again, we need highly trained, educated, and committed individuals trained in Marxist theory and class-independent methods of struggle. So could you tell me a little bit about what the IMT is doing to prepare for this perspective?
To prepare for this perspective, the IMT is training up a layer of working class people, workers, youth, in the ideas of revolutionary socialism, in the ideas and methods of Karl Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. Not just reading them by rote, but actually understanding the method behind that and their work and applying that to our current situation. So the real task of the IMT right now is to build up a layer of leadership that once there's a working class party, a mass socialist party, to really win this, we need that party to have a socialist program, a revolutionary socialist program. And those sorts of things aren't accidental. They don't just occur. That's really the task of the IMT is undertaking right now, is preparing that layer of leadership that when such a party emerges can actually guide that party to overthrowing capitalism. And the one thought I do want to share, just because of the thread of the conversation so far, is quite often that sort of view is sort of looked at as not really doing much. But let's look at the success of the publication Jacobin in influencing the DSA. We talked about why reformism has such a wide layer of attraction, despite the fact that if you look at Gen Z and millennials, survey after survey is showing their interest in revolutionary socialism, it has to do with the fact that they have a layer of people that are in position across the DSA to absorb them into reformist ideas, and that's a subjective sort of fight. So this work to prepare a layer of leadership, it's incredibly more difficult to train someone up to apply dialectical materialism as a revolutionary socialist than it is to put forward sort of reformist ideas. Our task then is to prepare that layer across the country so that when there is that movement that emerges, when conditions are ripe for it, and when the working class is ready to move towards revolutionary socialism, that there's a trained leadership that can assist it in that task and can be a catalyst for that task.
And I think we should just clarify for our viewers that when we talk about leadership, we're not talking about imposing a leadership on the working class. We're talking about people who can win the leadership of the working class when the interests and the consciousness of the working class inevitably are pushed by events to coincide with the revolutionary program and perspectives that we're putting forward, so that we can just take things that last couple of steps and push the boulder of rotting capitalism over the edge of the cliff, so to speak, at the last minute. And I think it's also important to add that the IMT, the International Marxist Tendency, is doing this worldwide, and that in any country around the world, if the working class comes to political power and issues a revolutionary internationalist call for world revolution and for defense of that revolution and so on, it's going to transform the whole world. The bourgeois used to be scared about the domino effect, and there is a point to it. I mean, in the sense that if one country gives the example of cutting the work week by half and having universal employment and free healthcare and and eliminating all debt and good quality housing, etc. I mean, what worker around the world, especially as wired as everybody is today with the internet, is not going to look at that and think, hey, that sounds pretty good. Why aren't we doing that in our country when we have just as much or even more wealth with which to actually provide those material changes in our lives? So with that, any final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people should go to socialistrevolution.org, click on our program, read through it, and if they agree with that program, they agree with the analysis in the program, have a look at our COVID-19 program as well. If you agree with that, you should join the IMT.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great way to end the show. We had a lot to talk about today, but thanks, Kay, for joining us. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you liked what you heard today, please like it on social media, subscribe, and share with your friends, your coworkers. And again, as was said, be sure to visit socialistrevolution.org for the latest news and analysis from a revolutionary socialist perspective, and of course, to join and get involved with the IMT. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep fighting the only fight that's worth fighting, the fight for socialism in our lifetime.